Hi everyone, happy Saturday. My name's Molly and I'm delighted to welcome you to our very first Creature Feature. Creature Feature is a new online series from the Harvard Art Museums that offers families and curious explorers of all ages a chance to discover magical creatures across the collections through close looking with museum staff. And as we begin today's program, I want to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge that the Harvard Art Museums and Harvard University is situated on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Massachusetts people, and we strive to honor this relationship. I also want to share a bit about how you can participate today. So you can see my friends Casey and Heather with their video screens at the right, and you'll meet them in just a minute. But before you do, I want to ask you to take a moment to find the chat box at the bottom of your screen. So throughout this morning's talk, Casey and Heather are going to be showing pictures of artworks from the Harvard Art Museums and asking you questions about what you see. And for our younger viewers, you may have to ask an adult for help, but you can type answers to these questions in the chat box, and I'll read these out as we go. If you're watching at home with somebody else, you can also tell your answers to the person with you, or both. You can tell them to the person sitting with you and enter them in the chat box. And I'll be keeping an eye on the chat throughout in case you have any other questions for me or for our presenters. And one more thing about the chat box, I'll just ask you to triple check that you're sending your messages to all panelists and attendees, and this way everybody can see what you have to say. We're using the Zoom webinar format, so your videos and microphones will be off the whole time, but I will read out some selections from the chat so that your comments can be heard. So now I want to invite Casey and Heather to say a quick hello. Welcome, Casey and Heather.
Good morning. My name is Heather, and I help organize special exhibitions and related books at the museum. And since we're talking about creatures today, we thought it would be fun to introduce you to the creatures we live with. My creatures are Cat, Chloe, and Moose. And Chloe was just up here walking around on my table. So if she says hello, you'll know who it is.
Hi, and I'm Casey. And these are my creatures, Dahlia and Arthur, and you might see a little cameo from them too. And at the museum, I work with the permanent collection and work on cataloging and researching works of art.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Casey and Heather. And so today, Casey and Heather are going to take us to the sea to discover merpeople from the Harvard Art Museums. So I'm going to ask them to go ahead and get started now. But before I do, I wanted to take just a minute to ask you to think about any merpeople that you might know from books or movies or stories, and to think about what a mermaid or merman might look like. And you can think this to yourself or type it in the chat. And now I'm going to turn things over to Heather.
Thank you so much, Molly, and thanks again to everybody for joining us this morning. So to get us started, let's first talk quickly about what a mer person is. So merpeople most commonly take the form of a mermaid or a merman, as Molly said, though they can often have different names, different powers, and even look really different. So here's a picture of a typical mermaid in the ocean. And you can see she has the torso of a woman and a large fish tail instead of legs. And next to her is an ancient Roman figurine of a woman with a large pair of wings attached to her back. And she has the feet of a bird. It's a little hard to see, but take a look down there. So we often see fish and birds alongside merpeople, and I want you to keep an eye out for these creatures too. So the figurine you just saw with the bird wings and the feet is a special kind of mermaid called a siren. A siren is a mythical figure who usually looks like a woman and who lures captains from the sea with music or song, sometimes by playing an instrument and sometimes by singing, sometimes both. And Our siren today is painted by artist Dante Gabriel Rossetti and is currently hanging in the museum's permanent collection galleries. This photograph should help give you a sense of its size so that you can imagine yourself standing in front of it while we take a closer look. So unlike typical mermaids, sirens are understood as beautiful but harmful creatures. They lure sea captains toward them on island shores and cause destruction or death. So I want you to imagine being on a ship in the ocean and hearing an irresistible song coming from a nearby shore. And think about what that song might sound like and keep it in mind as we keep going. So as you're drawn toward the sound, you're shipwrecked. So not cool, not a happy ending. And this scenario is common in stories about sirens. So I want to look closely at the details of this painting to better understand how the imagery helps tell the siren story. First though, I would like to take a moment to ask all of you a question. What details in this painting make you realize that we're at the sea or maybe even on an island? And I'd like you to share your responses in the chat box if you can.
Siren has noticed the seagull, and Frances says, it looks windy. And Jessie notices water in the background.
Those are all perfect. Thanks, Molly, for calling those out. And we're going to talk about all of those things actually. So that's great. So you recognize the water, and I want to call attention to two places along the upper edges of the painting. So in both of these spots, we can make out blue and white in the background. And so this tells us where we are. They're difficult to spot unless you look really closely, but the artist included these details to bring us to the sea, which is where the siren is always found. Another thing that you mentioned was the seagull above the siren's head. So its wings are raised in flight as it attempts a landing near the siren. And perhaps the bird is being lured into her song and flying into the scene from the water. And as we mentioned, the siren takes the shape of a woman, but the bird appears as a common part of her story. They're separate creatures, but they work together in this painting to help Rossetti identify the character. Other elements of the painting mimic the waves of the ocean and a sea breeze. So great for noticing the wind. Look at how the golden material of the siren's dress flows on her body and into the grass. The fabric itself seems to be waving in the wind and flowing back and forth. And the siren's long, wavy red hair blows in the breeze behind her. Her hands even create little waves. And all around the painting, there are indications of motion and movement. So the same is true of the siren's body. From the bends of her arms, the tilt of her head downward, to the curves of her knees and the arch of her back, we feel mesmerized as our eyes move along the painting's surface. I hope you can feel that too. And the siren herself seems to be mesmerized. So if we look closely, her face is really relaxed, her eyes gaze dreamily into the distance, and her head tilts so that it's almost resting on her arm. We see her one ear fully visible, and so we might wonder whether she's falling under her own spell. I think someone noticed this instrument that we see her playing, and she's strumming on this stringed instrument with her fingers, and we've identified this instrument as a kind of Japanese lute. It's called a koto. And you can see another example of a koto in this Japanese woodblock print on the right. Notice that both appear to be made of wood and have strings running along the length of the instruments and little frets forming a curved shape from top to bottom. So this is where the siren song originates, from the lute rather than from her voice. Another detail I want to point to which is between the sea and the Siren, is an apple tree. So they're full ripe fruits hanging from its branches. And if you can think of any stories or fairy tales that include apples, will you share them in the chat box? I see some great answers.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a guess of Adam and Eve and Snow White.
That's absolutely perfect. So in biblical stories and folklore, the apple foretells and can be a catalyst for danger. So think of the apple in stories like Adam and Eve or Snow White and the Witch. So the same kind of associations about apples when we read this painting can be made, and they symbolize a kind of deathly temptation. And if we look back again towards the lute, if we look just below, we see a patch of pink flowers here. These flowers belong to the snapdragon family, and they're thought to look like a dragon snapping its mouth. The name snapdragon sounds a bit scary or dangerous and adds a subtle new meaning to the siren story. So like a dragon trying to trap something in its mouth, the siren tries to trap nearby sailors with her song. Snapdragons are also sometimes symbols of strength, which could relate to the strength of the siren's power over sea captains as she lures them in. So by looking closely at some of the details in this painting that you recognize and thinking about what they mean, I hope you can see that they all work together to help tell us the siren story. And now that we've spent a few minutes with this type of mermaid, let's hear from Casey about another kind of merperson.
Thank you, Heather. I want to go under the sea and look at a pair of footed plates called Tazas that look like they belong in the ocean. The two cake stand-like objects were made by the British silversmith Edward Farrell almost 200 years ago, between 1826 and 1828. To get an idea of size and scale, I wanted to show you the objects in the gallery. Here you see them at the museum in what we call the silver cabinet, a gallery that showcases silver and other metals in our collection. Since they are made of silver, the Tazas live here. We like to think of the silver cabinet as a place where the shiny, glittery objects live. Before they found a home at the museum, Tazas like this pair would have been part of a dining service, which are all the dishes that would have been used for a fancy meal 200 or so years ago. While today, the various dinner items we use are pretty simple: forks and spoons, bowls and plates, cups. It would have been much more elaborate then, and definitely not at all like dinner in my house. A taza would be set on a table, and it would elevate the food so that it took up less room on the table, and that way, more food could be added, making a very extravagant meal. Sometimes, tazas were not used, but simply were a decoration in a large house. Let's return to our tazas. Looking closely, can you see any sea creatures? Can you use the chat box to tell us what you see?
First things to be noticed: a merperson, turtles, an urchin, maybe Aquaman, and Jessie notices the fishtails on the bottom.
Oh, these are all great. So I want to start with some of the real creatures we see. So, all right, so first, it seems like there are a lot of answers about turtles. So I think the turtle is the most recognizable sea creature on the Tazas. And here I have a real turtle alongside our silver one. I mean, I like to think that even though sea turtles are real, there's something magical about these giant creatures that glide through the ocean and live to an old age. The next creature I want to look at, and it looks like somebody did notice this, is this weird ball-shaped creature. This is actually a sea urchin skeleton. A sea urchin is an animal that is soft and squishy when alive, but it's covered in spikes. You definitely don't want to step on one. And so this skeleton of this sea urchin has these large cone-like bumps, but also smaller bumps and lines in between. What do you think it feels like? I've never actually touched one, but I kind of imagine it might feel a little bit like a seashell or a sand dollar collected at the beach. The artist that made these Tazas would have used a mold to create this part of it. And it's even been suggested that an actual dried specimen like this one might have been what the mold was made from. So finally, the last real creature, or should we say creatures, that I want to point out is this spray of coral that makes up the base of our footed plates. Coral looks very much like a plant, but it is really a community of very small sea creatures that build a hard skeleton, which keeps them in the shapes that you see here. The silversmith who made these Tazas tried to make the coral very lifelike by adding small branches that spread out from the center and fine lines that create definition. So let's look again at the complete Tazas. Well, we know that urchins, turtles, and coral are real-life sea creatures. The central figures of the arrows are pointing to are not. They are imaginary beings, a kind of mermen called tridents. So let's take a closer look at the figure and think about some of his features. We see the upper body of a human man, but he is without legs. Instead, he has what looks like two fishtails. He also appears to be blowing through a shell as if it were a trumpet or a similar instrument. Triton, with a capital T, refers to the ancient god Triton, who is the son of Poseidon in Greek mythology and the son of Neptune in Roman mythology. In books and poetry, tritons became the generic term for a merman. You may also be familiar with the version of Triton in the Disney film A Little Mermaid, where King Triton is the father of Ariel. Let's take a look at a few more examples of tritons that appear in art at the Harvard Art Museums. While we're looking, think about some of the similarities and differences you see in their appearances. First, we have a drawing of Triton in red chalk. He's also using a shell as a musical instrument, and he appears to definitely have the torso of a man that's a bit muscular. The second work I want to pause on is a print. It has a vase in its center and two tritons on either side. I hope you can see the very fancy fishtails that the artist added on. The last work I want to look at is a decorative design, and it features two tritons at the very bottom, swimming in the sea, blowing into their shells. It also looks like their hair is a little windblown, perhaps by the ocean breeze. There's also another magical creature right at the top, a unicorn, if you're interested. So while we looked at a few different works of art, I hope you saw some of the similarities with our figure of Triton here. A few of the things we can point out are a very muscular male figure on the top half and the tail of a fish, as well as the shell trumpet, which we know is a conch shell. Those similarities are how we recognize mermen called tritons, not only in works of art, but in books, movies, and TV shows. One element that was missing from our examples is a trident or spear with three prongs. You may have seen one of these in books or movies that feature mermaids and mermen, and it's often seen with tridents. Our Triton here does not have one, but keep your eyes peeled. All right. So let's look at the full object again and think about a few more of its features. Each Taza is made of three parts. The first is the base we just discussed, which includes the coral, turtle, triton, and sea urchin. The top of the Taza is made from two plates that screw into the top of the base. You can just barely see the bottom plate where my arrow is pointing. The top, however, is much more visible, and I'm going to switch to that now. So this is an image of the top plate, full of impressive decoration. Can you imagine what it might feel like? I like to think of the cool touch of the metal and the smooth texture of the figures. Take a close look at the border. Do you see any aquatic elements? Are there any recognizable figures? Let us know what you see in the chat box.
The folks are noticing a seahorse, a horse, a trident, some shells, the captain's wheel, and maybe the sun.
This is all great, guys. You guys have good eyes. So I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit at this top area first. Let's see. Okay. So we see a figure with a crown being pulled by a chariot and what appear to be mermen, since they are half man, half fish. So somebody called out a trident, and we definitely have a trident here. But while he's holding a trident and has a crown, he has the legs of a man. And because of this, we know he cannot be a trident. So instead, we have another mythical figure, the ancient god of either Poseidon or Neptune, who are the gods of the sea. And you would often see tridents with them, or sorry, tridents with them. He would often have a trident. He would often be in a chariot. But you also see we definitely do see our tridents here. So I want to zoom in on another area that was sort of towards the bottom. And here we definitely see a trident. We can say this because in addition to having the torso of a man and a fishtail lower half, he is blowing a conch shell. He also appears to be riding a dolphin, which 200 years ago was depicted in a way that makes it look a little bit frightening. So I don't know if you guys can see that. The teeth that dolphin supposedly has, he almost looks a little bit like a dragon. And then right below, I want to point out the really small marks in the silver. Made by the silversmith's tools by pressing in from the front side, the silversmith would have done this to create the illusion of waves. So he definitely wanted to place us in the sea. All right, so we're going to return to our full top plate. And we've talked about a couple of the elements in the border, and you guys have pulled out a lot more than we talked about. I'm going to zoom in on the center, and I want to see if you see any creatures, and let us know what you might see in the center here.
But an overwhelming string of unicorns.
So yes, you were right. There are definitely 2 unicorns here in the center. And then also right at the top, if you follow sort of the line of the unicorn's horn, there's a peacock.
They found it. We've got a couple people.
We've got a couple people, okay.
As well.
So these creatures, they're not nautical, but they are part of the center decoration. And this is called a coat of arms. And a coat of arms is a picture that was used by a family to represent them. They would have added it to all kinds of things such as flags, buttons, and like our Tazas, silverware, and other dinner table objects. Coats of arms are still used today, often by royals like the Queen of England and her family. The coat of arms is important to this work of art because it tells us for whom the Tazas were made. In this case, they were made for John Henry Manners, who was the 5th Duke of Rutland between the years of 1787 and 1857. The Duke and his family were silver patrons and commissioned many marine-themed objects. They would have likely had this coat of arms and other silver works in their home, and all sorts of other objects.
Casey, I just want to add that several people have noticed the person at the top of the coat of arms too, and maybe they're wearing a hat or a helmet or a turban, but...
So we believe it's a turbaned figure. So this is sort of a full coat of arms. It has the family's motto, but also the motto of the Royal Order of the Garter. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And it has the full cartouche. I don't think we quite know, or at least I don't know offhand what the turbaned man represents, but he does appear on both of the Tazas in this coat of arms.
Thank you.
So, well, on that note, Heather and I hope you enjoyed our dive, so to speak, into the sea. And if you'd like to explore other merpeople in our collection, check out some of these other objects. You can find them on our website by searching the accession numbers, which appear here in orange text. Molly, I don't know, maybe we have some time for some questions?
We do have some time for some questions. I also wanted to add that Amanda had noticed that there was a helmet, not a man, I misinterpreted, but there was a helmet below the peacock. So I just wanted
We can go back and look at that if you guys want.
I called that.
Yes, so he definitely has a helmet down there below. And there are really specific terms for the elements in a coat of arms. I don't have all of them offhand, but you would often see sort of a knight's helmet. And he's on top of a crown too, which is kind of cool.
Awesome. But we do have a few minutes for questions. So if anybody has questions that we didn't get to, you can go ahead and type them in the chat and I will read them out to Heather and Casey. So Susanna asks, are most merpeople depicted as women, or is it an even split between women and men?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
So most depictions of merpeople, at least in terms of sirens, like we saw in the Rossetti example, are depicted as women. There are, in much earlier times, depiction of men as sirens, but certainly so many depictions of mermen, like tritons, as Casey described. So I think that's a good question and something to keep in mind as you're observing nautical creatures, whether you can tell if it's represented as male or female. But yes, certainly in popular culture, for sure, and modern books and stories, we do see more mermaids than mermen.
We have a question from Arthur, who noticed the helmet in the crest at the top of the Taza. And Arthur is curious about what each of us do at the art museum.
This is a fun question. I can start. I work for the curator of the collection in our European and American art department, and I get to work on cataloging works of art, researching objects that might come in as new acquisitions, and all sorts of fun stuff. We get to spend a lot of time looking at art when we're at the museum, but also entering data into our database so that you guys have better access to information about works of art from the website.
And I work in the same department as Casey, but my work is a bit different. So I don't work on the permanent collection, but I work on special exhibitions that go up in our third floor galleries. If you've visited the art museums, we have several special exhibitions that go up in that space. So I help organize those projects for our division of European and American art. And I also get to help organize some of the books that come along with the exhibitions, some of the exhibition publications. And for fun, I get to do projects like this, where we work together to look closely at super fun things in the collection.
And Heather, that's a perfect segue, because my job at the museum is to make programs, which is fun ways for groups of people to get together and talk about art. And this has certainly been a fun one. We're getting close to, we're right at 10:30, so I'm gonna take one more question and then let you all go off to your Saturday mornings. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm gonna take two questions. One is, are mermaids supposed to be dangerous?
Ooh, good question. So not all mermaids are dangerous. The siren in particular, as a type of mermaid, is a dangerous one, but that doesn't mean that all mermaids are dangerous. There are so many good mermaids. Most of them are good.
Awesome. And then Jasper and his mom Jessie want to know if there's more out there. So that's a perfect question, Jasper, because some of the other merpeople in the collection, Casey and Heather, have shared on this slide. And after today's program, we're going to follow up by email with everybody to send you some links to look at other mermaids in works from the Harvard Art Museums. So that is a perfect way for us to thank you so much for coming today. Look out for our email early next week with links to discover merpeople. More merpeople, and I'll invite you to join us for our next creature feature, which will be on the first Saturday in November, November 7th at 10. And if you'd like to talk more about art this morning, we have a student guide tour at 11 a.m. And you can find the link to join that on our web calendar at harvardartmuseums.org. So I want to warmly thank Casey and Heather for this fantastic trip to the sea, and I hope you have a wonderful Saturday. Thanks so much.